Have you ever had a mystical experience while reading metaphysics or poetry? And if so, what were you reading, and can you describe the event?
Well, I've never had anything that resembles a mystical experience while reading metaphysics.
Well, it depends on what you mean by mystical experience, because I would say I have.
Tell us about it.
But it isn't, the heavens opening and the mysteries of the universe being revealed exactly. It's just, in reading metaphysics, you can get a view of something that is comprehensive enough to really say, wow. And I don't mean in the ordinary sense. I mean to really be moved by it. So, but I don't, it's not like some of the classical mystical experiences one might hear about.
No, well, sure.
But I'd say it's still in that category.
Well, I've read metaphysics that's beautiful and obviously true, but for me, it's always, descriptions about something.
Oh, sure.
And I've had more real experiences in mathematics than I have in metaphysics.
Well, that's fine. Mathematics is good.
And it's more participative.
Yes.
Than reading descriptions.
Yes, it is. But for me, it's like with metaphysics, sometimes there's an interaction between the concepts of something on one level and the concept of something on another level, along with some other concept that can just really be, it doesn't happen often, but that can really be special. Not just in a way where you say, oh, aha, now I understand. It's like, oh, wow, look at that.
Well, I think that in many ways that was our first reaction to In Search of the Miraculous.
Yeah, that was our first peek behind the first curtain anyway.
Yes, the first curtain.
Yeah, that was a moving experience. Changed our lives.
A turning point, clearly.
And it was almost like a little mystical experience when we came to Bloomington.
Oh, yeah.
And started reading,
real stuff.
Real stuff. And, it was just...
Yes, but part of that is that Schuon's exposition is so beautiful.
Well, yeah, that's part of it, too.
He's right, that's one thing, but his explication is so wonderful.
Well, yes, he's very precise. You know what he's saying.
And he says it beautifully.
Yes.
I mean, there are just wonderfully beautiful passages in Schuon. Right up there, if not surpassing Plotinus or Eckhart. Certainly Eckhart. Anyway, I didn't mean to take over this conversation. You were talking.
Well, I just said I've had what I would call, a low grade or a modest mystical experience with metaphysics and also with poetry. I think it's happened a few times, with Rumi and Kabir, but especially with the Ashtavakra Gita, which I consider to be poetry.
Yes, I agree. I'm getting a little teary just thinking about the Ashtavakra Gita, which is how I seem to respond to a lot of poetry these days. And that it's certainly a softening of my heart or my shell.
Absolutely.
But I often just can't keep my composure when reading poetry.
Yeah, but it's not a distressing event, it's sweet.
Oh, no, it's wonderful. It's a celebration.
Yeah, it is. I mean, absolutely. And I've had that happen from time to time. So, poetry, yeah.
I would say that all of what you said about metaphysics is true, but with qualifications. What you said is just as true for Kant as it is for most of the traditionalist authors, because it's just descriptive. On the other hand, the greatest writers who are writing things that are both true and beautiful, like Plotinus, like Heraclitus, like Plato, like some of the medieval mystics of different strains, their metaphysics is worth reading. But too often the traditionalists, it's reading about things, but not reading it. You're reading about metaphysics. Much of what we call metaphysics isn't reading metaphysics, it's reading about metaphysics. The purest metaphysics is like math, and the best metaphysicians involve you in the metaphysics. when you're involved with Plotinus, you're engaging with Plotinus. And of course, as someone whose master was Plato, even without writing in the dialogue format, he knew how to involve the student with the master. And that kind of metaphysics, yes, that can help one have an experience. That can bring one along. But when you're reading about Plotinus or about the truth or about God or about any of these things, no, not so much.
Right.
I think sometimes it's a question of, how involved are you in the experience of reading it? Because it doesn't have to be just data. You can take something and go with it internally.
Yes, indeed.
And, if the descriptions are really good, then you really do get a taste of what's being described. But direct experiences are better. Say, Meister Eckhart is pretty good.
Yes, he is.
And he's not a dry metaphysician.
No, not at all. But let me also add, the truth, the real truth, isn't about anything.
Right. No, but people write about it a lot. And that's all you can do. In terms of communicating it.
Right.
And since we're speaking of poetry, I just wanted to ask you, after our conversation last Thursday, Sheikh al-Bashir, you wanted me to send you some poems, but I didn't want to spam you, so I sent you 2 of them, and I just wanted to see if you had a chance to look over those 2.
I did read them and I liked them.
Okay.
Send 2 more.
Inshallah.
Other voices here? Sayyidah Badriya? Sayyidah Zainab?
Yes, I think much like with poetry, it's not really the content that does the magic, it's the state of one's own mind, or not even mind, it's the state of one's own being in that moment that does the magic. So I often realize that I could be very distracted and read a piece of poem that's really nice, but it won't speak to me at all. I find out that it's not really the content, whether it's a poem or a story or anything, that really does the magic. It's really the state of one's own being when they're reading this content that does the magic. So I recently came across a writing of a wise woman that says it's not fine-tuning what we're receiving. It's not the fine-tuning of the content. It's the fine-tuning of one's own mind that's needed to get the most out of what we're reading. So sometimes I am reading a poem, but my mind is distracted and the poem is not talking to me. It's not doing anything. Right. But the other times when I'm fully present with that which I'm reading, then there's definitely some transformation occurring.
Yes. What's moving is the experience you have with it. It's good spiritual writing is participatory. You put yourself in it and you put it in you and see what's revealed.
Right. And often it happens to me that when I'm reading poetry, and if I'm in the right frame of mind when I'm reading the poetry, then often the result or the expression that comes out to express what I felt by reading that poetry is also a poem. So I often find myself writing something that resonated with me in that moment when I was reading this poem.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Very good. Okay. What is the mystical significance of the name Allah?
There must be volumes and volumes written on that topic.
Yes.
There are.
The mystical significance is that you can unite with it and it takes you places.
Oh, yes.
And, it does teach. But I don't know that it's any more significant than any other divine name.
And serves the same purpose.
Same purpose, yeah, exactly. So, you can have a mystical experience in the invocation, whether it's big or small. And I think that's its significance, is that it can give you insight and experiences that you wouldn't otherwise have.
Yes.
And, it helps to know, the themes, give a way to know what it is it's about when you're invoking.
Uh-huh.
And it depends on participation.
Yes, it's an occasion and a method for participation.
And by its very nature or its meaning, it takes you, well, what's the best way to put this? Yeah, I can't quite. But, it represents the transcendent and it represents the immanent. And those two ways of seeing and being take us out of the ordinary. They take us out of our mental ruts. And so in a sense, if you know something about what it means, it's inherently uplifting.
Yes. Theta Vidriya.
My view is that it's not about the name, it's about what you do with the name.
Yes, and what's behind the name, because it is form.
So, building on that, is there any inherent esoteric superiority of the name Allah to names of other gods from other traditions?
No, but what makes the name Allah what it is, because it, people in other traditions may have a connection to a different divine name. I think the thing that's really important is that it fits in, that, the name is not just in isolation, it's part of a worldview or in order for it to, just a sound by itself, yes, you can make that sound and it can be a meditative technique, but you need to know something. It needs to fit in what limited concepts about reality that one has. But, if you can, yeah.
Similarly, the sound is readily graspable and usable without having to know the tradition or the history or the personality of the God.
Yes.
Allah is a primordial sound.
Yeah. And, so once again, it's an experience.
Right.
And if you penetrate any experience, you'll find something transcendent.
Indeed.
But I just, think if you know what it means that it's a divine name, then you're likely to get more out of it.
Yes, and I really can't comment on other traditions, particularly the ancient ones, because all we know, or at least all I know, is some of their names and personalities. One of the lovely things about Allah is that it doesn't come with a lot of anthropomorphic baggage.
Right. That's helpful, at least for me.
Yes.
Other people may have other needs.
Indeed.
In which case, a different name might be more helpful. But I still think it needs to fit into, something bigger or wider.
Yes, right. Or if not, find another name. I think people append anthropomorphic to this name.
Well, it's hard to avoid. That's why we have so much anthropomorphism.
That's right. Because there's so many of us, and it's for everybody.
Well, yeah.
Not everybody of which will understand it from the same point of view, angle of vision, depth, meaning, and so forth.
Yeah.
But it does have an immediacy to the sound and its articulation.
Yeah.
I find.
What if someone was to perform all the practices and invoke something with let's say, a sound such as that, but without anything behind the meaning? Could that work? Like, what if someone were to invoke and get their tasbihs out and everything and be doing Coca Cola, Coca Cola? I'm just wondering if someone was serious about the practices and invoked something like Coca Cola, could that work, theoretically speaking, or not, because there's nothing behind the symbol?
I think one would never say no to divine possibility or the divine generosity.
But I think it helps if the word used does not have a common meaning, that it could be just a sound. There are lots of people do say Om without, worrying how to define it or anything, because it is a sacred sound. So I think other things like Coca-Cola, if the experience is as deep invoking Coca-Cola and it gives you what you might have gotten from Allah, then it's a grace. But don't try to get a following and make a big deal out of it.
All right. If Islam as a religion vanished from the planet tomorrow and you had to choose another faith, what would it be?
Probably Buddhism.
Possibly Buddhism, possibly Hinduism.
Yes, I mean, Hinduism, can include a lot of things, but a nice combination or balanced view of Buddhism plus Vedanta, I think, yeah. But I wouldn't look for a Hindu form to support my practice. I would choose something other than that, and probably Buddhism.
I suspect that's what I would do.
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine living without Vedanta or what's behind it.
Yes, one might say, I can't imagine living without Allah, and I can't imagine living without Vedanta.
Yes, because I think between the two, it can cover all the bases.
Yes. It is Zainab. We haven't heard from you in a while.
Because I'm smiling here on the question. If Islam was to vanish from the surface of the planet, I would still be Muslim. I'm sure paganism vanished many, many centuries ago, but there are still people who believe in it. So to say something vanishes is a bit unclear to me. It may vanish from an appearance, but does it vanish from your heart?
Doesn't have to.
And for me personally, because I've gone through this journey, as we all have, to sort of rediscovery of what it means to communicate with God, I feel like Islam, coming from a Hindu background, that certainly helps, but Islam offered me that way to connect with the most primordial being. And, I can't really think of anything else. So me being Muslim doesn't deny in Hinduism being a valid religion or Christianity being a valid religion. So I don't think I would have to make this choice.
Yeah, I mean, if Islam vanished completely, it might vanish from our minds too. But if it's just the practice disappears, then you don't have a certain kind of support. But the practice doesn't disappear if you continue it.
Right.
Well, my answer is slightly different. Since the Tariqa grounds me, I would say that if Islam vanished from the face of the earth, I would become a Maynard, one of the ecstatic followers of Dionysus.
Well, I wouldn't.
I could go with.
I understand some of the nature of the shift implied, and I don't see anything necessarily wrong with it, because Dionysus has definitely something to offer.
He's actually the most interesting for me. I mean, everyone's different, but for me, he's the most interesting of all of the Greek pantheon. And many have found the same. Some of the most interesting writers on ancient metaphysics wrote the most about Dionysus. Dionysus was one of the few gods to have a very serious mystery cult, and Dionysus was also the only god that the Christians were so seriously worried about that they banned all of the rites that his followers were performing as part of the worship of him. But interestingly enough, and not many people know about this, the longest poem of Greco-Roman antiquity is actually the Dionysica, and it's exactly as long as the Iliad and Odyssey combined, and it was written by Nonnus, who was the poetic equivalent of Julian. So essentially he started out a Christian, converted to the Dionysian mysteries, and wrote a poem about Dionysus. And it's actually a very beautiful and good poem, and I wish people knew about it as much as people know about the Aeneid or the Iliad or the Odyssey, because it truly has something to offer. I mean, even as a Muslim or a Christian or an atheist, the poem actually has something to offer, but it's rather ignored.
Well, yeah, it's unknown and it's long.
It's unknown and it's long, yeah. And in Greek, in a time from a period where most scholars are interested in the Latin of the period rather than the Greek, and so on and so forth. But, Dionysus, depending on the tradition, either was born twice or 3 times, or in some traditions 4 times. He was a god that basically was born multiple times was ripped apart, died, and was born again. And he's symbolic of the quest for truth, for everlasting life, for God, you know.
Right. The truth can destroy you when it has an effect on you. You know, there's something that dies at certain points. So it sounds like another kind of crucifixion, or, you know, an earlier kind of crucifixion. Except that, I mean, I don't know if he's offering himself or anything like that. But that, you know, being reborn and reborn is a perfect symbol.
Yes.